What do you call a woman who finds a baby abandoned in a stable? A hero? A savior? Or just another sinner trying to wash away her past? In a town built on judgment and whispers? A single, silent choice will either save a life or expose a truth so shocking it could tear the entire world apart. They call her a painted lady, a fallen woman, a saloon girl. Her name was Cora, but in this town, it was just a whispered title, a brand etched into her skin. They didn't know the girl who once picked wildflowers and braided them into her hair, the girl who laughed with her mother in a sun-drenched field. They only saw the woman with red lips and tired eyes who poured whiskey for men with calloused hands and harder hearts. Grief was a ghost she carried with her, a heavy shroud that had settled over her after the fever took her little sister. It was a grief that had driven her from a respectable life, a grief that had made the harsh judgment of others a dull, familiar ache. She moved through the Golden Spur Saloon like a specter, her red dress a stark flame in the dim, smoke-filled room. The piano player, a man with a face like a dried apple, plunked out a mournful tune. It was a tune Cora knew well, the song of lost things. She wiped a glass, the coarse cloth rough against her palm, and watched the men. They were all the same, loud, demanding, their faces blurred by whiskey and loneliness. They sought something in the bottom of their glasses that they would never find. Cora understood that search. She was still looking for a piece of herself she'd lost, a piece she was sure lay buried with her sister, Eliza. The night bled into morning, the saloon emptying out until only the smell of stale beer and regret remained. Cora untied her apron, her movements slow and deliberate. She blew out the lantern, plunging the room into shadow. The silence that followed was a relief, a cool balm on a searing wound. She walked out into the pre-dawn air, the moon a sliver in the sky. It was cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold that promised a harsh winter. She pulled her shawl tighter, the rough wool doing little to block the wind. Her breath plumed in front of her, a fleeting wisp in the darkness. She wasn't going home. Not yet. Her small room above the saloon felt like a cage. She needed to breathe, to feel something besides the weight of her own sorrow. Her feet, used to the familiar path, carried her to the livery stable. The stable boy, a quiet kid named Silas, often left the door ajar for a stray cat. Cora knew the back door was always unlatched. She'd come here before, seeking the warmth of the horses, the earthy, comforting scent of hay and manure. It was a world away from the saloon, a place where she didn't have to pretend. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with the scent of leather and animal, a scent that felt like home. The horses shifted in their stalls, their soft snorts, and the rustle of straw the only sounds. Cora moved through the darkness, her hand trailing along the rough wood of the stalls. She found a bale of hay in an empty stall and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet wash over her. It was in moments like these that she could almost feel Eliza's small hand in hers again, a memory as fragile and fleeting as a butterfly's wing. And then she heard it, a small, thin cry. It wasn't a horse. It was a sound she knew deep in her bones, a sound that ripped through her carefully constructed wall of indifference and exposed the raw, aching wound beneath. It was the cry of a baby. Her eyes snapped open. She sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound came from the corner, near the tack room. Her heart ached, a sharp, familiar pain. It was the sound of a baby, but it also held the echo of a scream, a memory of a time when the fever had taken her sister and left a silence in its wake. She rose slowly, her legs stiff from the cold. She moved towards the sound, each step a conscious effort. The cry grew louder, more frantic. It was the sound of a small, helpless thing in a cold and indifferent world. She reached the corner and saw it, a small bundle of cloth tucked into a nest of hay. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The bundle was warm, a living, breathing thing. She unwrapped the coarse blanket to reveal a tiny face, a miniature doll-like creature, her face crumpled in a silent sob, her skin pale and waxy in the dim light. She had a shock of dark hair and a tiny mouth that opened and closed in a silent wail. Cora looked at the baby, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The grief that had been a constant companion, a steady hum beneath the surface of her life, receded, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. She didn't think. She just acted. She scooped the baby into her arms, pressing the small, warm body against her chest. The baby's cry softened, a tiny sigh escaping its lips as if finding comfort in her warmth. Cora held her, rocking her gently, the weight of the small life in her arms both a shock and a revelation. It was the weight of responsibility, of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. Cora sat there in the stable, holding the baby, and watched the dawn break. The world outside the stable, the world of judgment and whispers, felt far away. In that moment, there was only the baby, the scent of hay, and the quiet, fierce beat of her own heart. She saw the ghost of her own lost sister in the baby's tiny face, a mirror of what had been taken from her. But this wasn't a ghost. This was a living, breathing thing. This was a chance at something new. A hope that was both terrifying and utterly beautiful. She had no idea what she would do, but she knew, with a certainty that was as sharp as a blade, that she would not let this baby go. She had found a piece of her lost soul in a pile of hay, a fragile, new life that held the promise of her own redemption. The town stirred to life with the usual clatter and clang of a morning in the west. But something was different. The silence that had once shrouded Cora was gone. Now every eye followed her as she walked down the street. A baby swaddled in her arms. The whispers were no longer about her name or her trade. They were about the bundle she carried, a scandal that unfolded with every step. The townsfolk, a constellation of hard-bitten farmers, shopkeepers, and women with tight, unforgiving faces, stared. They saw a painted lady with a baby, and they knew what they thought. A saloon girl couldn't be a mother. A woman of her kind couldn't be trusted with a child. Cora walked on, her head held high. The baby, a girl she had decided to call Hope, slept soundly in her arms. The name felt right. It was a word she hadn't allowed herself to think, a feeling she had buried deep in the earth with her sister. Now, it was a living, breathing thing in her arms. She ignored the stares, the venomous glances, the way people crossed the street to avoid her. The world felt smaller, more contained, just the two of them against the cold, unyielding judgment of a town that had already decided her worth. She was no longer just Cora, the saloon girl. She was Cora, the protector. She found herself at the mercantile, the bell above the door jangling a discordant note. Mr. Abernathy, a man with a sour face and a ledger for a heart, looked up. His eyes widened, taking in the sight of her and the baby. He said nothing, but his disapproval was a palpable thing in the small, cluttered store. Cora set Hope gently on the counter, her small body still and peaceful. "I need baby things," Cora said, her voice steady. "Flour, milk, a bottle if you have one." Abernathy pursed his lips. "Don't know where you got that baby, Cora, but a child's place ain't with a woman of your profession." Cora's gaze was unflinching. "This baby's place is with me, and she needs these things, now." The storekeeper looked at her, then at the baby. There was something in Cora's eyes, a fierce, untamed light that made him turn and start gathering the items she'd asked for. He didn't look at her again. His silence, a statement of its own. Cora paid him, the worn bills she had saved from her tips feeling less like a source of shame and more like a lifeline. She gathered her things, Hope still sleeping peacefully, and walked out into the cold. She went to the doctor next, a man named Dr. Thompson. He was a kind man, his face a map of the lives he had saved and the ones he had lost. He greeted her with a nod, his eyes holding a question she was not yet ready to answer. He examined Hope, his movements gentle and practiced. The baby's cry, a thin, reedy sound, was a balm to Cora's ears. "She's small," the doctor said, looking at Cora. "But she's strong, a fighter." Cora held the baby closer. "She needs to be." Dr. Thompson looked at her, his gaze filled with a quiet understanding. "Where'd you find her, Cora?" he asked, his voice low. Cora hesitated. The truth felt like a betrayal, a fragile secret she was not yet ready to share. She just shook her head. "It doesn't matter. She's with me now." He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the difficult road ahead. "You'll need help. It's a hard life, raising a child alone." "I know," Cora said, her voice barely a whisper. She did know. She had seen it in her own mother, the way grief and hardship had carved lines into her face, but her mother had been strong. Cora knew she had to be strong too. She thanked the doctor and left, the weight of the baby in her arms, a physical manifestation of her new purpose. She made her way back to the saloon, the thought of its familiar darkness, a comfort. The madam, a woman named Maeve with a face like a hawk and a heart of gold, was waiting for her. Maeve had seen 100 girls come and go, but she had always had a soft spot for Cora, seeing a kindred spirit in her quiet grief. "Cora," Maeve said, her voice low and serious, "what have you done?" Cora just held the baby out. "I found her." Maeve looked at the tiny face, a rare softness coming to her eyes. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "This will change everything." "I know," Cora said. I can't stay here. Not with her." Maeve nodded, her mind already working. "This place ain't for a child. You can't raise a baby in a saloon." "I know." Maeve took her to a small room at the back, a storage closet they had never used. "It ain't much, but it's quiet. I'll make sure you get whatever you need. We'll figure this out." Cora nodded, a well of gratitude rising in her throat. Maeve, a woman the town had also branded and cast aside, was the only one who had offered her a hand. In the small, dusty room, she laid Hope down on a makeshift bed of blankets. The baby stirred, a tiny fist uncurling and reaching for the air. Cora took the small hand, the feeling of its warmth a shock to her system. She felt a profound and terrifying love for this tiny creature, a love that was both a gift and a burden. She had found something she had thought was lost to her forever, a reason to live, a reason to fight. The world had taken everything from her, but now she had something to lose, and she would not lose this. The whispers, once contained to the streets, bled into the saloon, carried on the breath of the men who came for a drink and a story. The saloon girl who had found a baby. The story grew with each telling, becoming a morbid fairy tale. She had stolen the baby. She had found it in a brothel. She was the mother herself, a secret shame she could no longer hide. The town was a viper's nest, each person a venomous tongue, and Cora was the snake they all wanted to kill. The town's self-proclaimed moral arbiter, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, a woman with a face like a dried prune and a tongue as sharp as a razor, led the charge. She had a husband, a rancher who never looked her in the eye, and 2 children who ran wild and unruly. She had no room in her heart for another person's pain. She saw Cora as a stain on the town's pristine reputation, a symbol of everything she hated. She organized a petition, a flimsy piece of paper filled with the spidery signatures of the town's most judgmental citizens. The petition demanded that the baby be taken from Cora and placed in the care of a respectable family. The town gathered in a makeshift court, a spectacle of righteous indignation. The air was thick with the scent of fear and hypocrisy. Cora stood alone, Hope a small, warm weight in her arms. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the men she had served, the women who had ignored her, the children who had been taught to despise her. She saw Abernathy, his face a mask of disapproval. She saw the doctor, his face filled with pity, a pity she didn't want. She saw Mrs. Henderson, her face a sneer of triumph. "This is an abomination," Mrs. Henderson declared, her voice ringing out in the hushed room. "A child cannot be raised in a place of sin. It will not stand. We demand that the baby be taken from this woman and given to a family that can raise it in a God-fearing home." A chorus of amens and hears filled the room. Cora said nothing. She just held Hope, her grip a little tighter, her heart a little faster. The town's sheriff, a man named Brody who had always been a man of few words, stood at the head of the room. He looked at Cora, then at the baby, and then at the petition in his hand. "Cora," he said, his voice low and weary, "do you have anything to say?" Cora looked up, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. She saw the malice, the judgment, the satisfaction on their faces. They saw a fallen woman. They saw a chance to feel righteous. She saw a town full of people who had never had to carry a real burden, a town that had decided what her life was worth without ever knowing her story. She took a deep breath. "I have a story to tell," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "A story about a fever that took my sister. A fever that was a plague on this town. You all remember it, don't you? The children it stole." The crowd shifted, a wave of unease rippling through the room. They remembered. They remembered the coffins, the fear, the way they had locked their doors and prayed for the plague to pass them by. "My sister's name was Eliza," Cora continued. "She was 5 years old. She was a light in the darkness. My mother and I, we tried everything. We prayed. We used every herb, every remedy we could find. But the fever, it was stronger. A woman in the crowd, a shopkeeper's wife, started to cry. The sound was a small, quiet sob that cut through the silence. We ran out of everything," Cora said, her voice catching on a sob she quickly swallowed. "We ran out of medicine. I went to the doctor, to the storekeeper, to anyone who would listen. I begged for help. I begged for medicine, for a blanket, for anything that would help us. But no one would help. They were too afraid of the fever. They were too afraid of us. My mother, she had nothing left. She had to bury her own child. And I had nothing left to lose. I left. I left this town, and I became what you see before you. A painted lady. A fallen woman. Because I had to survive. And I couldn't do that here." Cora paused, her eyes meeting Mrs. Henderson's. "You see, you all see a woman who is a stain. I see a woman who did what she had to do to survive a world that had left her to rot. A world that had left her to bury her own sister. And now you want to take this baby from me. This baby who I found in a stable, who was left to die just as my sister was left to die. You want to take her from me and give her to a respectable family. A family that might have the same fear, the same cold heart, the same unwillingness to help someone in need." She looked down at Hope, her face a map of love and pain. "I will not let that happen. I will not let this baby suffer the same fate as my sister. She will not be left in a stable. She will not be left to die. I will protect her with my life. I will work for her. I will do whatever it takes to give her a life that is full of love. A life that is full of hope." The room was silent. A hushed quiet had fallen over the crowd. The venomous glances, the self-righteous anger, had been replaced by something else. Shame, embarrassment, the recognition of a shared truth. They had been afraid. They had been selfish. They had looked away. They had left a family to suffer and a young girl to die, and in doing so, they had turned a respectable woman into a saloon girl. Mrs. Henderson's face was pale. She looked at her husband, who was staring at the floor, his face a mask of sorrow. She looked at the other women in the room, their faces etched with guilt. The petition felt like a burning coal in her hand. She let it fall to the floor. Sheriff Brody looked at the fallen paper, then at the crowd. He looked at Cora, a woman who had been broken, and then rebuilt herself into something stronger, something more beautiful. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of her strength, her courage. "This court is adjourned," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This baby stays with her mother. With the woman who found her, with the woman who has proven she has more heart than all of us combined." The crowd dispersed, a silent, ashamed mass of people. They didn't look at Cora. They didn't look at each other. They just left, their footsteps a hollow echo in the silent room. Cora stood there for a long time, the silence a kind of balm, a quiet peace that settled over her heart. She looked down at Hope, at the small, sleeping face, and a single tear, hot and free, fell from her eye and landed on the baby's cheek. It was a tear of sorrow for the past, for the sister she had lost, but it was also a tear of hope, a tear for the future, for the new life she held in her arms. She was a saloon girl no longer. She was a mother. She was a survivor. She was a testament to the truth that a heart, once broken, can still find a way to heal, and that love, once lost, can still find a way to return. In a town of sinners, she had found her own kind of redemption, proving that a painted lady could have a heart of gold. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.